Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers for the 7th legislative day of 2011. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up on tonight's program, a federal court rules the federal health care law unconstitutional. Georgia leaders react. Democrats and Republicans unveil 2011 legislative agendas. The House decides not to consider a veto override by the Senate on a zero-based budgeting bill. And we continue our series of leadership interviews with House Majority Leader Larry O'Neill. We'll be talking Sunday alcohol sales as well with two in-studio guests, Senator Don Balfour, co-sponsor of a bill that will allow local referendums on Sunday sales, and Stoney McGill of the Georgia Alcohol Dealers Association, a lobbying group. We've got all that and more coming up tonight on Primetime Lawmakers. But first, a federal judge strikes down the Obama administration's health care overhaul. Governor Nathan Deal calls the ruling a victory, but not a complete victory. Wandy Lawson was at the press conference when the announcement was made. She joins us live from the Capitol with the details. Good evening, Wandy.
Good evening, Scott. U.S. District Judge Roger Vinson this afternoon ruled that compelling individuals to purchase health insurance violates the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution. His ruling went further to say that the entire Health Care Act then is therefore unconstitutional. Governor Deal says that this is the point he's been trying to make ever since he was a member of Congress.
As a member of Congress well over a year ago, I spoke on the floor of the House of Representatives and cited as my reason for opposing this legislation that I felt that it did violate the Constitution as it related to the individual mandate. And Judge Vinson has made a ruling that coincides with that opinion that I held and have held for this entire time.
Attorney General Sam Olens joined the governor in lauding that ruling, saying it provides the best path for the matter to make its way to the nation's highest court.
We're delighted with the wording that the judge used, frankly. I mean, he literally stated he wished he could find a way to hold the bill constitutional, but he cannot. And he gave a very well-reasoned analysis in that regard. Clearly, we want it up in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Congressman Lynn Westmoreland was also on hand, and he urges that Congress should resolve this matter so that it doesn't have to go to the Supreme Court.
I hope that this decision today by Judge Vinson will encourage Leader Reid in the Senate to go ahead and bring up the repeal bill that we passed in the House, and that would certainly get this process along rather than having to go through the long drawn-outs going to the Supreme Court. Then we could start to implement some things and get them into process right away and not have to wait to 2014 or beyond to get some of these common sense things into effect.
Now, Governor Deal acknowledges it's going to take several years for that case to make it to the Supreme Court, and that because Judge Vinson's ruling does not grant injunction to the state, the rollout of federal health care overall will continue here in Georgia. In other news, the Senate GOP unveiled its top 6 priorities as creating jobs, saving the Hope Scholarship, setting government spending limits, reforming the state's education funding formula, cracking down on illegal immigration, and tax reform. But the jury is still out on whether there'll be movement on the tax reform measure this year, although Senate Finance Chair Bill Heath says this process will go forward this session.
I don't think that it's a 2-year process. I think that we will do whatever we're going to do this year insofar as the recommendations from the Tax Council. Now, those might get voted down, which would certainly mean they could be taken up at any time in the future. But I don't propose that we delay in considering the recommendations of the Council.
Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers, however, followed up with this.
We're going to be very careful in this process. And one thing we're going to do a little different than Washington, D.C., we're going to make sure that every one of our members reads this thing and understands it. And we're going to go through this process before we throw something out there that reforms an entire tax system. And one of the complaints that we heard on the campaign trail time and time again is you have people voting to overhaul a health care system that didn't even read the bill. That will not happen in the state Senate, at least on this side of the aisle. We will read the bill. We'll make sure everybody understands what's in it. This is something that's going to impact all 9.8 million Georgians and those traveling through our state, and they deserve to know that their legislature took their time and did this right. So not exactly sure how fast we'll move on this. I agree with Senator Heath. The work that has gone into this deserves us to pay attention to it, to take it very seriously, and to begin working on it very soon. But we will not move forward on it until we're ready to move forward on it. We will not move forward on it just for the sake of moving forward on it. We will do this and do it very carefully.
When the House introduced House Bill 87, its immigration reform legislation last week, bill sponsor Representative Matt Ramsey told primetime lawmakers that the bill had come from the recommendations of the House Senate Special Committee on Immigration Reform. Today, the Senate's representative from that committee explained that the Senate would be tackling the matter more slowly and without regard for potential federal lawsuits.
The Senate version will be different. We're gonna do everything we can to make it the least burdensome as we can for businesses in this state, including the Agriculture Committee. Just have to wait till agriculture business. So you just have to wait until we get the bill out and take a look at it. But I can assure you we're going to do everything we can to make it the least burdensome as we can, but still have businesses be able to comply with the E-Verify system.
Like his House colleague, Senator Murphy says the threat of federal litigation doesn't shape legislative decisions.
If anything we did down here, if we considered getting sued, we would never get anything done. So no, that really doesn't concern me. We're trying to structure the bill to where it won't, we won't have a problem. But no, I'm not worried about a federal lawsuit.
And from the opposite chamber and the other side of the aisle, House Democrats today rolled out a four-pronged legislative priority list, including bills to increase reporting for earmarked funds, more consumer accountability for the Public Service Commission, foreclosure protection, and amnesty for taxpayers who owe the state money. House Minority Leader Stacey Abrams says that measure alone could net the state millions.
In the last economic downturn in Georgia that was substantial in 1992, 20 years ago, this program netted $51.3 million. In New Jersey last year, they raised $725 million. Connecticut, a state that is certainly a fraction of the size of Georgia, they raised almost $25 million. Our belief is $5 million, $10 million, any new revenue that comes into the state of Georgia that can help us make better choices for our families, those are the dollars we need and those are the dollars we seek.
The Encouraging Responsible Taxpayers Act was dropped in the House today. The other legislation that the Democrats will introduce will come later on this week. And finally, there was an attempt in the House today to force a vote on last week's Senate override of one of former Governor Sonny Perdue's vetoes. Representative Bobby Franklin argued that House leadership is violating the state constitution by failing to call for a vote on the zero-based budgeting bill.
If the Senate overrides a veto in Article 3, Section 5, Paragraph 3, and they immediately transmit it to this House, it shall be immediately considered by this House. Zero-based budgeting's time has come. This whole House has the constitutional obligation to immediately take it up, not take it up after some committee has looked at it. We must obey the Constitution. We can't expect the people of this state to obey any law we pass if we ignore the supreme state law of our land.
House Majority Leader Larry O'Neill countered that it would be illegal to go along with the Senate veto override.
If this motion is successful, I think we'll be called upon to vote upon an illegal matter. The Senate Bill 1 requires the zero-based budgeting having been incorporated into the budget that's already been delivered by this governor to this House of Representatives. This is old business from an old governor. We have a new governor now. We have a new bill introduced in the House for zero-based budgeting. I suspect that it will be as successful as Senate Bill 1 was last year, but it has a time frame that is achievable by this entire legislature, both House and Senate, and I urge you, each and every one, to vote no on this motion.
The House agreed with O'Neill, with only Representative Franklin voting to appeal the ruling of the chair. That attempt was defeated. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Wandi Lawson for Primetime Lawmakers.
Hey, Wandi, pace is picking up. Before you go, back to the health care ruling today. Congressman Lynn Westmoreland alluded to a health care solution that might arise if the Obama administration health care bill is completely overturned. Did you give any details on that?
Oh, yeah. In fact, Congressman Westmoreland spoke to the fact that largely the problem is the cost of insurance rates that are too high and that legislation should work to bring those down, and also that there should be some sort of a solution that does not involve intervention from the government between the doctor and the patient.
So he'd like to see it go back to the legislature, not to the courts, like a lot of other people.
That's what he said.
All right. Hey, Wandi, appreciate the report tonight. Thank you so much. And now to tonight's leadership segment. Late last week, Monty Lawson sat down with House Majority Leader Larry O'Neill to get his views on the recommendations made by the Tax Council for Reform and Fairness. You may recall that Representative O'Neill previously headed the House Finance Committee. He's worked as an accountant and tax attorney and is considered by many to be the foremost expert under the Gold Dome in the area of taxation. And Monty began by asking him whether the committee's recommendations would lead to legislation this session.
The absolute honest, thoughtful answer to that is right now I really don't know. What I do know is the data they compiled is extensive, and it's very comprehensive, and it's very academically data based. It's not philosophical in a lot of ways. It's certainly not political in a lot of ways. We have plenty in that recommendation to evaluate, plenty of concepts to evaluate. You're right, there does seem to be a moderate gravitation toward consumption taxes, but in that is the principle of taxing outputs instead of inputs. All the economists, regardless of whether or not they're considered from the liberal side of the stance or the conservative side, have said that the taxation of inputs is a retardant to recovery and is a retardant to prosperity. The taxation of outputs is not. And out of all the taxes, if we're going to have to pay them, that's the consumption tax is the only one that the taxpayer decides when and how much they pay. Probably the most hated of the taxes are where you're taxed and you don't even have income or anything to show for having to pay it. The property tax seems to be the one that most people loathe the most, because with no profit or no income, it's still due or you're going to lose your property in our society. So sometimes you don't want to fix what's not broken either. We just went to 49th out of 50 states as far as tax burden on our citizens at the state level, not the local level, but the state level. There's only one state that imposes less taxation on a per citizen basis than Georgia. And I think, I'm not sure of this, but I think that's Alaska, and I believe that's because they actually pay you to live up there because of the pipeline and the oil reserves. So to me, that's a critical measuring stick. We do not burden our citizens near as much as all of our sister states in this great country.
Does that indicate to you then that perhaps we don't need, as you mentioned, to fix something that's not broken? Maybe there's not really a necessity to move towards revising the tax code?
That's why we have such an open mind about this. And not to make a political statement or draw a contrast, we're not going to consider a 150-page and probably a 1,000-page treatise on taxation in an overnight manner and just vote on a bill because we have to vote on a bill because we said we would. That's the reason there's still lots of analysis, lots of evaluation, and looking at the comprehensive package. Everybody can pick out one thing they don't like or they do like that's in this comprehensive approach. All the way down to, is there going to be a sales tax on Girl Scout cookies, as absurd as that may sound? Well, certainly we don't want to create a subculture of chilling the sale of Girl Scout cookies, especially as that relates to charitable outreaches and so forth. But philosophically, that's a consumption tax. So there is much consideration on a point-by-point basis. Once you understand all of the prongs of it, you still have to bring all those spokes together into a wheel that runs as an analysis. And that's the comprehensive approach here. And I'm personally not near ready to that, and I'm not sure anybody else in this General Assembly has had the time or done their homework, so to speak, enough to deal with this in a comprehensive way. And it will be evolutionary in a way, because our tax code arose out of an agrarian society, an agricultural society. Most of our tax law was promulgated back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And we don't live in the 30s and 40s and 50s anymore. We live in a world economy, an electronic economy, if you will, with very few, if any, geographical boundaries. And we really haven't kept up. I think we've become obsolete in a lot of ways. So that's part, again, of the academic evaluation of this, and with hopefully not creating the individual prejudices of maybe the 300 or 400 individual matters that are in this recommendation. So that's a challenge. I can't speak with direct knowledge from times before 2000, but I'm told by the economist that having a situation where your revenues have declined something like 23% in 3 years and dealing with that on a budgetary basis has never been replicated prior to the Great Depression. So we have some serious challenges to get through this budget year, and we'll have to do so without much assistance at all from the federal government. We don't have any of the stimulus funds coming to supplant our obligations, and we all agree, no matter what philosophy of the government side that you're on, that there are certain core missions of government, and the biggest one of those is education, that we have a constitutional obligation to provide Georgians, and so we'll be weighing every possible efficiency that we can and still provide the necessary services, healthcare, education, and protection to our citizens.
Representative Larry O'Neill is the majority leader in the House. Thank you so much, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you.
And thank you, Wanda. We have a primetime politics segment coming up later this week on this very network, where we'll talk about taxation and the budget. And Representative O'Neill is right. We're 49th as far as the state tax burden is concerned per capita. When you add in the local taxes, it puts us somewhere in the 30s. So it's an issue that is going to be revisited. Primetime Lawmakers and Monty Lawson joins us each evening from the Capitol. There is more to come after this short break. We'll go in depth on a new Sunday sales bill with Senator Don Balfour, one of the bill's co-sponsors, and Stoney McGill of the Georgia Alcohol Dealers Association. Stay with us. Yes. Just talk to me. Welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers. For several years now, proposed Sunday sales legislation has been stalled after a veto threat from former Governor Sonny Perdue. Current Governor Nathan Deal has indicated he would support a bill that gives local governments the ability to decide if they want alcohol sales on Sundays in stores. Among the bill's opponents are some store owners who don't want to have to open on Sundays to compete. Now, last week, a bill was introduced in the Georgia Senate that would allow local governments to hold referendums on the issue of Sunday alcohol sales. And now I'm joined in the studio by Senator Don Balfour, co-sponsor of Senate Bill 10, and Stoney McGill, the lobbyist with the Georgia Alcohol Dealers Association, a group that represents liquor stores. It's great to have both of you with us this evening. This is a topic that has a lot of people buzzing, of course, across the state. But before we get to our topic tonight, Senator, I wanted to just get your reaction to this, what might be a landmark decision by the federal court in Florida on this lawsuit that Georgia was part of on the unconstitutionality of the health care reform bill, especially the individual mandate. You have some hospitals in your district. What kind of reaction are you getting?
Absolutely. We are very happy that the court and the judge ruled in this manner. It's the judge, we believe, was correct in saying that this was unconstitutional and a restriction in individual liberties, and hopefully, obviously, this will go to the Supreme Court of the United States to have a final decision, and hopefully they'll come up with a similar ruling.
2014 is the year, basically, when the individual mandate would go in, so that's the timeline we're looking at. Okay,
that's right.
Great. On to the topic this evening. They say Sunday sales. Of course, we're talking about Sunday alcohol sales, and especially package sales, and you co-sponsored SB 10. What would SB 10 do?
It would allow a local jurisdiction, whether that's a city or a county, for their elected officials to decide whether there was going to be a vote. The local elected officials by themselves cannot allow the grocery store to be open on Sundays or the alcohol store to be open on Sundays, but they can hold a referendum. So it's a two-pronged approach. If passed by the legislature, the local county, the local city could decide to hold a referendum, and then the people then would vote to decide whether this would occur or not.
And we're talking about package sales, right? In other words, the kind of stuff you'd buy in a grocery store or a convenience store at certain hours on Sunday.
That's correct.
Beer and wine.
In Publix and Kroger's, it would be your beer and wine, and in liquor stores, it would be some of your harder liquors, probably.
Well, I'm glad you brought that part up. This is where we bring in Stoney McGill, and this is going to be an education for a lot of us tonight, to be quite honest. A lot of people might not realize this would include hard liquor. What's the Alcohol Dealers Association reaction to that?
Well, we have always, we're an association of retail liquor stores, and we're mostly small mom and pop organizations, family run businesses, and we have always, prior to this legislation, opposed any Sunday sales legislation. On this particular legislation, it seems like the pathway has been cleared for it to pass, and while a majority of our folks would rather not be open on Sunday, they don't want to miss the boat with beer and wine. They want to add liquor and be able to be competitive with the grocery stores and the convenience stores. And it's got some other things in the bill that we like. Less hours. We won't be starting till 12:30 as the current bill reads now, and that's out of respect to the religious communities and whatnot. So this bill is more palatable for our folks based on the fact that it looks like it's going to pass.
Huh. So there at least is sort of a halfway endorsement here, is what you're saying from your association.
Well, we're not opposing the legislation. Again, if something were to happen and the bill went away, which I don't foresee happening, and I think most of our folks would be pretty happy about that. But again, we can't be excluded in this process.
Senator Balfour, what chance does it have of passing this time?
I think it has a pretty good chance. In the past, there was fear of bringing up a bill that we would vote on if the governor was going to veto it anyhow, and Governor Perdue felt pretty strong that he would veto this bill. Governor Deal has made mention that he would not veto the bill. And so I think this leaves room for the legislature, and I think this will happen. The committee, I believe, is taking it up this next week, and then at that point in time, maybe vote it out, and then it would go to the floor of the Senate for their vote, and then back to the House for theirs.
Change is pretty tough, especially issues like this, like turning a battleship, isn't it? You got to be kind of careful because people get upset and tip over if you're not careful at all about it. Is there potential for communities to say, okay, you can sell beer and wine in grocery stores on Sunday, but we don't want hard liquor to be sold on Sunday? Or is that provision in there?
No, sir. It is very clear that if a municipality has authorized previously liquor, beer, and wine to be sold the other 6 days of the week, that if they put a referendum on the ballot, that referendum must include liquor, beer, and wine in the referendum. And that was something very important to our folks.
Okay.
Our folks don't want to see Publix or any other convenience store, grocery store open on Sunday, and we wouldn't even be able to go into our stores.
Some states split it up like that, Some like as close
yes,
as North
sir.
Carolina
I believe there are 17 states nationwide that don't allow distilled spirits by the package to be sold on Sundays.
How would it actually work, the mechanism of this whole thing? Let's say the bill passes, and then what are we looking at community to community and how this thing might wind up being implemented?
A city like Snellville, which is in my district, the city fathers, the city manager, the elected officials there would sit down and decide whether they wanted to bring this up for a vote. If they decided they didn't want to bring it up to a vote, it doesn't go to the people. It's dead at that point. The county, Gwinnett County, is wet already. But they could decide not to bring this up for a vote. If the county commissioners decide not to bring it up, that's it. That's the end of it. But if the county commissioners want to bring it up, that's fine too, but they still have to have a vote of the people. So there's a two-step approach on this. I will tell you there's only 3 states in the United States that don't allow beer and wine sale on Sunday. So we're one of the very few. This next Sunday, we're coming up against Super Bowl Sunday. In Gwinnett County, I could go to the local sports bar and watch the pregame, drink, watch the game, drink, watch the postgame, drink, and then what are my choices?
Doesn't need a driver, I hope.
Yeah. Where I couldn't go to Publix and Kroger's, buy a 6-pack and go home and drink.
Right.
And so, that's where we think, by giving a local option, that gives us the ability to take a look at this, ability for the local governments to decide whether they want to bring it up. And I think what would probably happen is Metro Atlanta and most areas of Metro Atlanta would probably allow it. And for instance, counties that are already dry, they're going to stay dry.
You know,
cities that are already dry, they're going to stay dry.
Matt Towers, Insider Advantage, came up with some polling just the past week that showed a total flip-flop. Around 65% acceptance of this in the metro area, around 65% against it in South Georgia. Are you finding that the churches are organizing against this at all, or a little more quiet this time around?
The way I understand it is that they are already focusing on the local government, local governing authorities. They feel, just like we do, that this bill has gone around and been perfected and most likely going to pass. And so I think they're focusing on their own communities and hoping that it doesn't pass there, or it doesn't even make it onto the ballot.
People need to realize that there are more tax issues here than just sales tax, right, on alcohol?
Oh, yes, sir.
And is there any study that's been done on the impact of what this might do to the Georgia Treasury? First from you, Mr. McGill.
We've looked at states that have gone to Sunday sales or allowed Sunday sales, and you see an increase, but typically that increase mirrors the increase that they may have had the year before based on population. We don't think that there's going to be a lot more consumption based on this law passing. We just feel like it gives the consumer choice to purchase on whichever day they choose. And Sunday is a huge shopping day, so our folks will in those areas where they allow Sunday sales, we're going to be, those folks will be forced open because Sunday is a big shopping day.
Tax ramifications here, Senator?
There's a few $1 million maybe, but where that would be along the border communities, Columbus, Georgia, on that Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday, if the Krogers and Publix are closed, they can go across the bridge 2 miles away to the Krogers and Publix in Phoenix City and get whatever they want. In those communities, there'll be some bigger impact. In Gwinnett County and Metro Atlanta, I suspect there won't be a great deal of impact or an increase in consumption because you're not going to drive to South Carolina or Tennessee or Alabama to go get your six-pack.
Has law enforcement weighed in on this at all? What's their attitude about this?
Well, we feel that law enforcement there's going to be some confusion. If there could be a store that's in a city and right down the street, one in the county, and the one in the city may be able to be open on Sunday, and the one right down the street may not be able to be open on Sunday. We had a similar experience with Election Day closings, which happened back in the early 80s.
Well, what about the drinking and driving aspect of it? Are they, have they taken a look at it from that angle?
Actually, Mothers Against Drunk Driving have been in favor of this type bill in the past. Again, for the very same reason I bring up in my example. If they're drinking and driving at home, they're not driving. If they're going to the sports bar to see the Super Bowl and they're there for 2 or 3 hours, unfortunately, some of those people will drive home and they probably shouldn't be. So in the past, and I don't know, not in this specific bill, but it's very similar to other bills, Mothers Against Drunk Driving have been in favor of this type bill in the state of Georgia because they believe it will reduce driving-related DUIs.
So SB 10 goes to committee next week?
That's correct.
More or less. And good chance that it's going to be brought up this session?
I believe so, and I believe that we'll get this out of committee. The committee members will take a look at it, probably have a good long discussion, vote on it, and then be on the floor within a few weeks to get over to the House.
Thank you both for being here with us tonight, shedding some light on this. I think you've illuminated a lot of people this evening.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you both being here on Primetime Lawmakers. And that's all the time we have. I thank our guests for joining us this evening. Coming up tomorrow on Primetime Politics, more in-depth analysis of the 2011 session of the Georgia General Assembly. We'll continue our leadership interview series. House Majority Caucus Chair Donna Sheldon is scheduled to appear, plus all the latest Capitol news. That's tomorrow night at 7 right here on GPB. If you'd like to see a repeat of this broadcast, Primetime Lawmakers can be seen at 5:30 tomorrow morning. Now, coming up next to GPB, join David, Kat, and Ricky for Georgia Traveler. Tonight's episode, Peach State Panache. Georgia Travelers next here in GPB. And that's our broadcast for the 7th legislative day of the 2011 session. Thanks to both our guests for joining us tonight. For Wandy Lawson and the whole Primetime Lawmakers team, I'm Scott Slade. Tune in tomorrow. We'll see you then. Good night.
This is a GPB original production.